Well, thank you for joining us today for the Google Hangout. It's the last in a series we'll be doing for Colorado Right to Know campaign, specifically for the Facebook group Moms for Labeling. We've had the honor of interviewing some extraordinary researchers and scientists, and today we are joined by Dr. Thierry Vrain. He is coming to us out of Canada, and his background is absolutely extraordinary. He is a former soil biologist and genetic scientist. He worked for the federal government for 30 years. He was the designated spokesperson to assure the public of the safety of GMO crops until he retired about 12 years ago. He now is on a speaking tour around Canada, and he has worked around the world to highlight the dangers that he sees in these genetically engineered crops, and we are so honored to have him with us today. His background is extraordinary. Again, he brings the scientific credibility to this discussion that is so critical as we move forward, discussing the importance of labeling genetically engineered foods here in the United States and in Canada, so that the U.S. and Canada can join 64 countries around the world and families around the world where genetically engineered ingredients are already labeled. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Vrain.
Thank you, Robyn.
I know recently that you've just submitted a letter to the federal government again, where you are highlighting your concerns around genetically engineered crops. You spent 30 years with the federal government. Could you give our viewers a little bit of your background, please?
I did spend 30 years with the federal government. I was a research scientist. I was hired in 1977 after my PhD in North Carolina by the Fed in Canada, Agriculture Canada, the equivalent of the USDA. And I spent all my research career in 3 institutes, one in Quebec and one in Vancouver at UBC, University of British Columbia. And then I ended my career in Summerland, which is about 5 hours drive from Vancouver in the interior. And I finished also somewhat in management. I suppose I was the head of a large group of molecular biology department.
And you shared with me how it was about 12 years ago when you were looking at research more from a personal place versus the 30 years of professional experience that you had, and you started to see some contradictions in the science. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Even though I was retired, I couldn't help looking at research and what was published year after year after year, and I did notice there was quite a bit of accumulation of studies, mostly out of Europe, saying there is definitely something wrong here. There is, feeding studies, long-term, short-term, etc., showing that there was liver and kidney damage, etc., on the rats, and I thought, there are so many other studies that say that it's safe. How could that be? And then I kind of put 2 and 2 together and somehow became convinced that a lot of the studies that were showing that it was safe were absolutely not really independent. And that's when I decided to look into it. And 2 years ago, I decided to go public and start speaking publicly. And when I started speaking publicly, I was talking about GMOs. I was talking about genetic engineering, how the yields are not increasing, etc. Very much the conversation, the debate that the industry wants us to have. And it's only about a year ago that I realized it's not about genetic engineering technology. It's about the herbicide that is associated with the genetic engineering technology. And that's, for me, is a new horizon. And I decided to very much to alert and alarm people that there is definitely something very toxic.
So, I'm going to take it back just a little bit for viewers that may be joining us who may not even know what a GMO is, who may not even know what a genetically engineered organism is. And the introduction of these new products into our food system began about 20 years ago by these chemical companies, as you've highlighted. And the chemical companies, again, they were in the business selling chemicals, and using this new technology realized that they could genetically engineer seeds to contain certain traits that either made them tolerant to increasing doses of some of these chemical applications, or it gave the seed the ability to create its own insecticidal toxin internally within the plant. And, you know, I come out of the finance world. I was a financial analyst that covered the food industry. And when I first saw that, I thought, you know, that's a pretty smart business model for a chemical company because it's going to help them sell more chemicals. And sure enough, if you review the financial reports and the quarterly earnings for these chemical companies, that's what's driving a lot, you know, is the sale of these agricultural chemicals, and the applications are going up as these things are applied to their crops. And I think what's fascinating in your story is that, you know, as you highlighted, a lot of the science was around the genetically engineered product. And then what you've come to in the last decade is, well, what about all the stuff that's being applied to those genetically engineered crops? And again, that is what's driving revenue for these chemical companies. I mean, their last quarterly earnings report, that is a key driver of their revenue, are the chemical applications that are being applied to these genetically engineered crops. And I think it's something that has obviously alerted you so much that you are now actively speaking out on something which, you know, for any of us doing this, it's not a comfortable place to be, and it subjects you to a lot of criticism. It also, you know, puts you on the front line of something. And as we shared earlier, it's not something really I don't think that any of us choose. It chooses us. Mm-hmm. And once you know this information, you can't unlearn it, and you also can't not share it and give it as a gift out, the knowledge, to people that are willing to hear it. So what you've learned now with these chemicals, specifically one known as glyphosate, that is applied to these genetically engineered crops. And again, these genetically engineered crops are called Roundup Ready crops because they've been genetically engineered to withstand Roundup. And Roundup is a weed killer that any parent knows not to store under our kitchen sink because of the concern of the toxicity of that product. And it's that same concern of this chemical glyphosate that really is a huge part of your work today. And can you give us a little bit of a background of glyphosate?
I will. I just want to point out really that in agriculture, this is a hugely successful technology. The engineering technology in the last 18 years have been incredibly successful. And when you talk to the farmers, they don't really talk about GMOs or genetic engineering. All they know is Roundup Ready crops. That's all they know. And when you look at the numbers, the statistics, really Roundup Ready crops represent more than 90% of all that is available out there in agriculture, particularly in Canada. And that's what I outlined in the letter that I wrote to the Minister of Health. It's Roundup Ready crops, that's what it is. Roundup Ready means that they have been engineered to be sprayed with the herbicide Roundup. Okay, so the active ingredient in Roundup is called glyphosate. And if you look on Wikipedia or the website of Monsanto, you will learn that glyphosate was invented as a herbicide in 1969. And that is not correct. Glyphosate was invented as a new molecule in about 1960 and patented in 1964 as a descaling agent by a medium-sized chemical company in the USA called Stauffer Chemicals. It was a descaling agent. The business of Stauffer Chemical was to clean up industrial pipes and boilers. So they were looking for a chemical that would actually take all the minerals. You know, you have an electric kettle at home. After using it for a few months, you have mineral deposits on the side or at the bottom of it. These are called scales. And in industry, the scales are really decreasing the efficiency of the pipes and boilers. And so they need to be cleaned up from time to time. So you put a chemical in the water that will remove the mineral deposits. And that's a descaling agent. And glyphosate was invented as a descaling agent and patented. There's a patent number. You can Google it. Everybody can read the patent for glyphosate as a descaling agent in 1964 by Stauffer Chemical. A descaling agent is a chemical. It's a very small molecule that will basically solubilize the minerals in the water and take them out of circulation, make them non-reactive, as well as bio-unavailable. They are completely inert now. Those minerals are out of commission. They are bound to the molecule glyphosate. They cannot be used for anything, particularly by living cells. So this is what glyphosate was invented for and patented in 1964.
Okay, so here we have an agent that takes basically the minerals or the nutrients out of anything that it comes in contact with.
Mm-hmm.
So it made sense as a chemical cleaning agent, basically for pipes. And then it was probably within the decade that they realized that they could also use it as an application to crops. Can you discuss a little bit that transition and why something that was used for cleaning pipes suddenly could be used on food crops?
Well, this particular this chemical glyphosate, once it has done its job in the pipes and boilers, you want to take it out and you put new water in the pipes and boilers, so you have to dispose of it. When you dispose of it, you realize in nature, you realize that it's killing plants, all plants. And that's when Monsanto bought the molecule and the patent and repatented it as a herbicide in 1969. Again, there's a number for that patent. It's public, it's available. So now we have this chemical, this molecule, as a herbicide owned by Monsanto. And they commercialized it in 1974. 1974, we have a brand new herbicide on the market, which has a completely novel chemistry. No other herbicide has a chemistry like that. It works because it kills plants by preventing one enzyme from working in the chloroplast of the plant. And that enzyme in the chloroplast of the plant is responsible for making amino acid, the aromatic amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. If you cannot make your proteins, you die very quickly. And that's what happens to plants. So now you have a wonderful herbicide, a very broad spectrum, very powerful herbicide, as you had the patent of 1964 is very clear that it's a very powerful and broad spectrum disk-killing agent, meaning that it binds to all metals, basically.
So it just as it did in the pipes, it goes in and it grabs the minerals out and basically flushes them out with it. One of the concerns that I've heard from other scientists is that the same thing happens here with the plants. That process is called chelation, where it literally takes the minerals out of the plant, strips them out of the plant. Some of those minerals that have been stripped out of plants that are treated with Roundup are magnesium, copper, and zinc. And these are critical for anybody, but especially for children.
All metals, Robbins. It's not just magnesium, copper, and zinc. It's sulfur, iron, selenium, cobalt, magnesium, manganese. That's the manganese is the metal that is responsible for killing the plant, because the enzyme, the protein, that enzyme that in the chloroplast that is impaired has a metal atom of manganese in the center of the protein. So it's not just three metals, it's most of them. And the metals are not removed from the plant. They're still in the plant, but they are bound to the molecule of glyphosate and completely bio-unavailable. They cannot work anymore.
Okay. So as that process is happening in the plant, can you describe a little bit that impact and the fact that it's binding to these glyphosate molecules, and at the same time it's not available for the plant for growth. That nutrition is not available. The minerals are not available for the plant for growth. But isn't there also some concern that these plants, it's not like you are routinely spraying glyphosate over the plants and it just washes right off. The plants essentially store it, don't they? And can you go into that in a little more detail for us, please?
When you spray glyphosate or Roundup on the plant, you kill it very quickly because of this chelation, because it prevents one enzyme and probably many others from working. So that's quite separate from the technology of genetic engineering, where the plants have been engineered to survive being sprayed with a herbicide. We can come back to that if you want later. So it's not that the plant accumulates glyphosate, it's just that it's been sprayed with a chemical and it has residues of that particular molecule, like it has residues of any other pesticide that is being sprayed with, be it a fungicide or an insecticide.
So for the plants, so we've got two concerns. Obviously, before the advent of genetically engineered crops, there was the spraying of Roundup and glyphosate. I really would like for you to address, once a crop has been genetically engineered to withstand it, what are the impacts there?
If you spray a herbicide on a plant, you kill it. So you cannot spray a herbicide on your crops. That's not possible. So as a herbicide in 1974, as a new herbicide, Roundup was used as a regular herbicide to spray weeds, to kill weeds. So you kill your weeds in the field like using any other herbicide, and then you plant your seeds. So you have some residues of Roundup in the soil that might be taken up by the new crop that you just planted. Okay, minimal somewhat, small residues in the plant because it's only available from what there is in the soil. With the advent of genetic engineering, now the game is completely changed because now you have a new crop, completely new, and the farmers are being told basically to ignore their weeds, and they plant their seeds, never mind how weedy the field is, because they know very well that in 2 or 3 weeks, when the seeds have emerged and now they have seedlings about a few inches high, now they can spray and completely kill all their weeds. And if they haven't killed all their weeds, they can come back a few weeks later and do it again, because the crop is now engineered to be resistant to the herbicide. So now you are spraying the crop once or twice, sometimes more, so that the residues of that herbicide in the crop are much higher than they used to be before the advent of genetic engineering, when Roundup was used as a regular herbicide. So now you have upped the ante, the residues are much higher than they used to be.
Okay, so the storage of the residues, have we studied the long-term impact of that?
No, absolutely not. Glyphosate, you said the word earlier, glyphosate is a chelator. All it does is it binds to metals. It has no acute toxicity per se. It's not going to, animals do not have the same enzyme that plants and bacteria have, which is impaired, and that's why they die. Animals do not have that enzyme. So therefore, it was deemed in 1969 or in 1974, rather, when the Roundup was commercialized, that there would be no toxicity possible to animals. And that's still the belief we have today. It is completely innocuous. It has no toxicity to animals because it works on an enzyme that does not exist in the animal kingdom. Humans are animals. I'm just talking of animals because that's the domain of life. So we have this chemical is now sprayed on the crops more than once, and with high residue of a chelator that makes the minerals that are taken up from the soil in the plant bio-unavailable. And this is documented. There are several research papers out of the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, has shown that the soybean grain contains much less of many different kinds of metals than the regular soybean that have not been sprayed. The engineered soybeans that have been sprayed with glyphosate, with Roundup, are depleted in minerals. And I learned from a farmer 2 days ago that a bushel of corn used to weigh 66 pounds forever, for a very long time, for the last 100 years. And the USDA has decided now that a bushel of corn weighs only 64 pounds. There is 2 pounds missing. What do you think is missing? There is 2 pounds of minerals missing in a bushel of corn, of engineered corn today.
Wow, that's stunning. So, again, going back to this toxicity issue, one of the differences that you highlight is, as this chemical, glyphosate, was studied, acute toxicity was what was studied. But I think what a lot of scientists and researchers are starting to question is, what is that chronic toxicity? And what is this accumulation doing to us over time? Not, what's it doing to the soil? What's it doing to, obviously, the health of the plants? I mean, you've just said right there, within for decades, a bushel of corn was 66 pounds, and now it's 64 because of this mineral depletion that we're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's this absence of the long-term chronic toxicity studies that, again, is where a lot of parents in the United States, and I'm sure in Canada too, are asking these questions. What is the long-term impact of all of this? And what is the synergistic toxicity of all of this? And in the absence of that science, while we're calling for more science, can we label these ingredients the way they've been labeled in 64 countries around the world?
My position is there's absolutely no need for further science. The case is closed as far as I'm concerned. There is no acute toxicity, and that's how it was in 1974, and that's still what we function with, or at least the authorities and the government, the EPA, etc., etc. Now, there's a 2010 patent on glyphosate by Monsanto as an antibiotic. Glyphosate is antibiotic. You read the text of the patent, and you see that 1 part per million of glyphosate will kill basically all bacteria. Okay? So, all right, so big deal. Well, the big deal is that we have again, we don't have the enzyme that glyphosate blocks, apparently. And I will come back to that. But the big deal is that we are a symbiotic organism. Humans are symbiotic organism. And I always shock my audiences by saying, do you know that only 1% of the DNA in your body is human DNA? Do you know that 10% of the cells in your body are human cells? 90% of the cells in your body are bacterial cells. And we call it the intestinal flora. That's how it used to be called. Well, now the medical establishment, which has been incredibly interested in it, calls it the microbiome. The microbiome is like a new organ. We have a new organ in our belly called the microbiome. And those bacteria, we have 100 trillion bacteria, 10 times more than the human cells of our body. We have 100 trillion bacteria with thousands and thousands of species, and they're not just there for the ride. They are symbiotic organisms. They talk to each other, and biochemically speaking, and they send signals to our brain, to our heart, to our digestive system, of course, and to all our organs. They are in charge of our immune system. They teach our immune system how to work. They, for example, they make almost all our neurotransmitters. The serotonin in your brain comes exclusively from the bacteria in your gut. And you know what serotonin, how important it is to your well-being, mental well-being. If you don't have enough serotonin, you're very depressed. And I tell people, if you have a little less than that, you're mentally ill. And this is the bacteria in our gut. And we are ingesting in our food residues of a chemical that kills the bacteria in our gut. This is an incredible situation. And this is a 2010 patent. There is absolutely no arguing about what glyphosate can do.
So for you, the case is absolutely closed, given what you've seen glyphosate do.
I'm not the only one. There's plenty of papers in the last 5 years that have been published, and this is what I talk in my lectures. There's plenty of papers that have been published that show that if glyphosate can kill the bacteria in our intestine and in the microbiome, there are severe consequences to that. It's like taking a low dosage of antibiotics day in and day out. Imagine that if you're a chicken or you know how we raise chickens and cattle in concentrated operation in barns, etc., and they're so stressed that they need antibiotic. And this is where we are. This is how people are fed today. We have become chickens and cattle. Not only that, but glyphosate, and there's quite a few papers about that. This is the letter that I sent to the Minister of Health in Canada refers to all kinds of, there's all kinds of references after my letter pointing out the studies that have been done. And this is all documented. This chemical also does not bind just to manganese to impair this particular enzyme in plants and bacteria. It also binds to iron. And iron happens to be the mineral that is in the center of a very large family of enzymes called the CYP enzyme, the cytochrome P450. These are the oxidizers. These are the first line enzymes of detoxification. if you impair those enzymes, you cannot detoxify anything. And God knows there's quite a few things to be detoxified in our food in modern days.
So, listening to you, I mean, to you it is case is closed. And just listening to you today, where we are talking about a chemical that was first patented to literally clean out industrial pipes. It was then patented again for a different reason, to be used as a weed killer. And then when genetically engineered crops, when Roundup Ready crops came on the scene, again, the residue load on our food increased dramatically with the introduction of Roundup Ready crops. And your concern around that toxicity, that alone, has led you literally to come out of retirement, where you've spent the last couple of years, literally on tour, going around the world, and you are not alone, because what we're starting to see in countries around the world is not only have some countries labeled these genetically engineered crops, again, because we don't have these long-term human health studies, and in the absence of these long-term studies, they said, we're just going to simply put a label on these things so that we can conduct post-market surveillance, so that we can track any potential negative health implications that might occur. It's a very precautionary, very smart approach when it comes to protecting the health of a population. And just listening to you talk, again, this leap in 2010 to take something that was originally used to descale industrial pipes, and now to have it in 2010 patented as an antibiotic. Again, I mean, the iteration on that design, to me, is stunning. And I wonder now, if you can address a little bit, why in 2010 was this suddenly patented as an antibiotic? Does that afford it some protection under patent law as an antibiotic? I'm just trying to understand how something that was used to clean out pipes is now suddenly patented as an antibiotic.
Because it chelates, it binds to so many metals. Glyphosate is basically a biocide. It kills all life, because all life forms, all cells, all living cells rely, all living cells rely on what are called metalloproteins, the enzyme. We call them enzymes, but they're really proteins that have in the middle of the protein of the molecule an atom of metal. It could be iron, like hemoglobin, or the CYP enzyme that I just mentioned. It could be the EPSPS from the chloroplast that I talked about in plants and bacteria that has a manganese atom. It could be vitamin B12, cobalamin, which has a cobalt atom, etc. It could be sulfur, it could be selenium, it could be etc. Okay, it's a biocide. And so this has been known for years and years. It kills plants, it kills bacteria, it kills insects, it kills everything. It's very toxic, chronically speaking. It's very toxic, chronically speaking, to animals. All animals, like humans, have a microbiome. Okay, we are all symbiotic organisms. You have the bacteria. Basically, the bacteria there's 3 pounds of bacteria in your intestine, the same weight as your brain. Okay, and those bacteria, like I said, they're basically, it's not exactly that we're puppets, of course, but they're definitely part of the scene, and they help us live. We cannot live without them. This is so obvious. So now we didn't know that, particularly 50 years ago, and we've learned that 10 to 20 years ago. There's the a human microbiome project. It's as big as the Human Genome Project of 20 years ago. There's lots of universities, particularly in the USA, which are working together now to decipher, to analyze, to identify the species of bacteria that we have in our guts and how they work together, and what their role is, and how they signal, how they talk to each other, and how they talk to all our organs. And this is new. This is new in the last 10 years. We didn't know that in 1974 when Roundup glyphosate was commercialized as a herbicide. So we had a descaling agent which became a herbicide because it kills plants, which becomes there is in my research, I found a patent application for glyphosate as a biocide. If when you have planted your corn and soy, engineered corn and soy, and you have some bacterial disease or fungal disease or any kind of disease, well, you can spray Roundup again because it will kill everything except the crop. This, and the patent has not been granted yet, so I don't know what the deal is. This is 2005. 2010, because it was known very well that it kills all bacteria, then why not market it as a pharmaceutical? It's a very useful antibiotic. It will clean up all the bacteria, except it doesn't work very well. It doesn't. Apparently, the Clostridium botulism, and difficile, I don't know if you're familiar with these names, and Salmonella are not touched. They are resistant to this particular antibiotic, to glyphosate. So now that we are feeding our chickens corn, engineered corn and soy with the residues of glyphosate, which kill the good bacteria in their guts, we see Salmonella epidemics in the poultry. We also see Clostridium botulinum epidemics in cattle for the same reason, because we are feeding our cattle corn, engineered corn and soy, which kill the good bacteria. And we are also seeing epidemics of Clostridium difficile in the hospital, because people now are coming down with this infection, which are extremely difficult to clear.
So I'm listening to you, and my first thought is, how can we support your message and your work? Obviously, every day we urge people to vote with their shopping cart, navigate that grocery store differently, steer away from these genetically engineered crops, foods that contain them. It's hard, especially in a country that doesn't label them, because most consumers would have very little idea that these have even been put into their foods. But listening to you, I think this precautionary call to action, the fact that, again, it was a chemical descaling agent that then was patented as a weed killer, that then was patented as an antibiotic. As a mother, when I am giving a child antibiotics, I am informed of that in the pediatrician's office. When my son was so sick that they suggested that he go on low-dose antibiotics, I declined that and sought a different answer. Because, as you've highlighted, in the last 10 years in pediatric research in particular, there are doctors like Dr. Kenneth Bach off the East Coast who are literally saying that gut-brain barrier and that connection between gut health and brain health is something that is critical. And
absolutely, to
protect the gut health of a young child, where so much of the immune system is found. Again, it just speaks to the need for parents to be able to make an informed choice that the food they're feeding their kids now is registered as patented as an antibiotic. I mean, again, that's a decision that you make with your eyes open when you're standing in your pediatrician's office. It's not something that you necessarily think you're going to be encountering in the grocery store today, which, as you've highlighted so beautifully, it is. And my question is, what can we do as parents to support this call for precaution? I mean, I lean towards saying more science, but you're saying case is closed. We don't need any more science. It's out there. It's done. That science is what is moving the rest of the world. Not only are these countries labeling genetically engineered crops, but as we've highlighted, some of these countries are just starting to ban glyphosate. What can we do?
If you don't mind, I'm going to take one more minute to give you another side of the story, which is a horror story, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay.
If I forget to answer your question, you will ask me again. But glyphosate, Roundup, glyphosate, the herbicide, is now used as a desiccant. Nobody knows what a desiccant is, but in farming and agriculture, farmers know what a desiccant is. A desiccant is a chemical, a herbicide, usually that kills the plants. You kill your crop just before harvest, and you clean up the weeds just before harvest. And so, like all the cereals, for example, the cereal, wheat, oat, barley, pulse crops, beans, sugarcane, and many other crops are sprayed just before harvest with Roundup, because it makes harvesting much cheaper and easier. So you can imagine the level of residues in the food that comes from those crops are incredibly high. And because they are incredibly high, you probably know that the EPA raised the maximum legal limit of residues in the food, in most food items, a year ago in 2013. And so now we have 30 parts per million in cereal, 100 parts per million in animal feed, and 120 parts per million in soybean of glyphosate. This is incredible when you know that 1 part per million is antibiotic.
Right, and I think, again, as a mother, I'm thinking the studies of what that impact might be on a pregnant mother, on a developing fetus, on a child with autism, on someone with Alzheimer's. What's the impact of that on somebody with colon cancer? These are the questions that have not yet been answered, again, which is why countries around the world are labeling these products, or labeling these ingredients, and in some cases they're restricting their use altogether. Again, I think it just, to me, is how can we come together? How can we support your work as a scientist? There are other scientists that we've spoken with, former EPA scientists. We have researchers like Dr. Don Huber, who spent a career studying these things, and he also has sounded incredible alarms around the use of glyphosate and its application and how that could be impacting this next generation. What can we do together to really quickly drive this change?
My suggestion is to distribute the letter that I've written to the Minister of Health in Canada. It's a concise letter. It's 3 pages long. It's well documented. It has a long list of references. It's serious science. And that's why I say there's no need for more science. The case is closed as far as I'm concerned. If you can help, and if everybody can help distribute that letter so that everybody becomes aware of it and take action, I'm not sure how. This is not my field. I'm just a scientist or a retired scientist. But I think when everybody really knows what they're dealing with, maybe something will move. Oftentimes in my lectures I said, when you're in a grocery store, you were asking me that question, what can we do? You're in a grocery store and there is those non-GMO stickers. Well, the non-GMO stickers are not really useful if you are talking about sugarcane, for example, which is not GMO, but it has been sprayed with Roundup. Or the cereal, all the baking, all the food, all the bread, etc., contains high residues of Roundup, and the grains are not engineered. So I say fruit and vegetables are not engineered. There's a couple of exceptions, but it has nothing to do with Roundup-ready crops. They are virus resistance. So fruit and vegetables are not engineered. Everything else in the store contains corn, soy, the meat department, the animals are fed corn and soy, engineered. The dairy, same thing. Everything in the store that is processed, that is baked, that is canned, that is prepared, contains sugar. 100% of sugar beets are engineered. All this has residues, high residues of glyphosate.
Right. I think, that's a really important distinction to make, and I've spoken with people inside some of the food companies that are concerned around that false sense of security that non-GMO can give, because as you highlighted, it's not allowed to contain the GMO, but it is still allowed to be treated with some of these synthetic chemicals and these toxic treatments. And so it doesn't do anything to educate or address the routine saturation of some of these other crops by these chemicals like Roundup. And I think, here in the United States, the only way to ensure that you are navigating around that is by purchasing products that contain the USDA organic seal, which means by law they're not allowed to contain the genetically engineered ingredients or these synthetic toxic pesticides. My problem with that is that that's only affordable to a certain percentage, a very small percentage of the population. It's growing like crazy. Wells Fargo recently did a report where they highlighted that 70% of Kroger shoppers, which is just an everyday grocery store here in the United States, 70% of shoppers are now looking for products that are free from a lot of these artificial ingredients, free from a lot of these toxic ingredients. And so it's a movement here in the United States that's growing. But we sort of have this financial discrimination and this price discrimination because at the federal level it's been priced in such a way that farmers that use these chemicals and that grow these genetically engineered crops that are routinely treated with these chemicals, they receive all kind of financial support, and the forms of subsidies and marketing support and crop insurance. And then the farmers that are choosing to grow their foods organically, which means by law without the use of Roundup, they're charged fees to prove that their things are safe. Then they're charged fees to label it. They don't receive the same level of marketing support, and they don't receive the subsidies. So there's a real financial discrimination, and we're feeling that impact every time we turn around as families, because it prices people out of that organic food which is not treated with Roundup. And then at the same time, you know, if you can't afford those cleaner foods, some of these health concerns and some of the damage, some of the organ damage and things that you highlight in your research, again, it's, you know, to me, that's where it truly is a human rights issue, that it really is truly a social justice issue. You know, this is one of the greatest civil rights issues of our time, is that it shouldn't be a function of zip code, the type of food that you can either have, you know, treated with this chemical that you consider case closed toxic, versus another small segment of the population that's able to afford organic. And to me, that's why I know I'm going to be doing this until I have a silver ponytail, because that has to be established. That equilibrium has to be set so that farmers can choose, have financial flexibility to choose what they actually want to grow, and that a consumer standing in the grocery store, they're priced equally so that that consumer can choose which products they want to put in the grocery store for her family. And to listen to you talk today, you know, I think the conversation is critical. I have so much respect for your courage and your dedication to this. The fact that you couldn't turn your back on it is something that is truly a gift to just countless families around the world, but especially here in the United States and Canada, where we have not had that right to make an informed choice that this has even happened to our food. So, Dr. Vrain, you truly are a hero, and there's just so much respect due to you for everything that you've done.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will be posting his letter at robynobrien.com, and also have links out to other organizations who will be posting the letter as well. Again, it was just written to the health minister in Canada, highlighting the concerns of glyphosate, these toxicity concerns. The letter is backed with countless footnotes. It lists all of the studies, any of the backup information that you might need, whether you're a journalist, whether you're a mother, whether you're a doctor making a presentation, a pediatrician, or whether you're somebody like Dr. Vrain, who, you know, has maybe been inside the federal government for a long time and is realizing that the promise of this technology and the studies around it are opening up a lot more questions for all of us. So thank you to everybody that joined us today. Thank you again, Dr. Vrain, for everything you've done.
Thank you, Robyn.